Welcome back to Man vs. Meeple, the show where we talk about all things board game related. I'm David Waybright, and I'm here with Jeremy Salinas, and today we're going to talk about Great Western Trail. This is the new one from Alexander Pfister and Stronghold Games. Jeremy, this one came out late in the year, but it's going to be at the top of a lot of people's list.
It is definitely a medium to heavyweight Euro game. Plays in about 2 hours, ages 12 and up, 2 to 4 players. Players are tasked in this game from going from Texas to Kansas City and doing that loop over and over again, taking very specific cattle to Kansas City and scoring points by doing that trade route. It's a fascinating game, David. I really, really enjoy this game. And like you said, it's only recently been released at Essen. It's coming out in the coming week, and I think it's going to take a lot of people by surprise by just how good it is.
It's going to be a big holiday game gift, for sure.
I think so. So in the game, each player is going to be given a player board. On that player board, they're going to have discs which are covered. They're covering specific aspects or abilities. They're called auxiliary abilities that players will be able to use at specific times in the game. On the board itself, you're going to start at Texas, and all the players are grouped down there on the bottom right-hand corner of the board. And what they're going to be doing is they're going to be moving along different routes going to Kansas City. Now, the trick in the game is that during your turn, you're allowed to move 3 spaces. Those spaces are not including the uncovered spaces that you see on the board, only the places where there are buildings.
Right.
So, and through the course of the game, players will be placing their own buildings and enacting their own abilities, and not only that, but the abilities of the neutral buildings that are on the board.
Exactly. It's like an almost ever-evolving rondelle, because you're going through this thing over and over, almost like a circle. But right now, at the beginning of the game, you're making big, large moves. You can get to Kansas City pretty quick. In fact, at the very beginning of the game, everyone seeds the board by placing their token at any of the locations. So you could actually start very close to Kansas City on your first round. And the key of getting to Kansas City is each time you do that is when you're going to be able to get rid of one of these discs and evolve your player board a little bit.
Right. So on the board itself, you're going to start with some neutral buildings, which all players are allowed to use if they stop on that location. There's also hazards. Hazards require players to pay money if they decide to go that route. And the reason why you'd want to go that route is to avoid other players' buildings, which can sometimes make you pay money to them directly instead of to the bank.
They also serve as places you have to stop, like you said. They are any location or tile on the board counts during your movement. So the more hazards there are, you're not only paying money, but you're going slowly through that area, which kind of thematically is kind of cool.
There's also Indian trading areas. These are also stop locations where you have to physically stop your player. But there are also things you'll be collecting, both the hazards and the Indian TPs, for kind of a set collection in-game scoring bonus, depending upon the cards that you get. So to start off the game, each player will get a goal. These goals will direct players on doing specific types of things. For instance, collecting certain types of cattle, collecting certain types of hazards.
Building house structures on the board.
Right. And the cool portion is that later goals that you have to collect will actually go into your deck. Now, there is a light deck building aspect to this game with the cattle, but also the goals that you collect outside the starting goals will go into your deck. You can choose to use those goals or not, but if you use those goals, you have to get the ability, or you have to do whatever it says on the card. You get a negative benefit at the end of the game, which is really cool. Plus, all of those goals have a one-time benefit when they're actually played. And when they're played to your tableau, and they stay there for the rest of the game. Now, one of the cool aspects in the game as well is that each of the player boards has room for workers, and you're going to be hiring staff in order to get beneficial abilities for your side. Now,
these basically help you do some of the actions on the board. Like you were about to say, I think there's cowboys, there's the workers, is that the term? Craftsmen, and then what?
Engineers.
Engineers. We call them conductors, railroad barons. But those are the 3 different workers you're going to get, and when you place those on your board, you're going to be able to do the things in the game a little bit more easily. Like a cowboy is going to help you when you're getting cattle. The craftsman helps you build buildings.
And the engineer will help you move along the train track, which is a scoring track at the end of the game that players will be able to use. So whenever you reach Kansas City, you're going to go through 5 different steps, right? The first step is you will reseed the board with specific aspects. So on the left-hand side, these are the staff people that you can hire, right? It's also the timer within the game. This timer will move down each time that new staff is added, and it'll be the player's choice when they go to Kansas City which staff that they wish to place into that area. So not only will you be able to buy from that in the future, but your opponent will also be able to buy from that location in the future. The next thing that happens is a really cool portion. As we said, you will be collecting cattle, but the cattle you want to collect are not only worth victory points, but they're also going to be used to trade in at the end of your trade route going to Kansas City, and you want cattle that are different.
Right.
You only score points depending upon the cattle that you have. You're going to add up all those cattle, plus any certificates. Certificates are kind of a wild that you can add into it.
Yeah, they basically inflate your cattle at the end of each round.
Right, and you're going to look at that number and be able to move, take one of your tokens off your board and place it on whatever area that you're allowed to travel to the furthest.
Right, so you're not only getting money for your cattle, but that same value is applied to that route at the top. So you can go from all the way from Kansas City to San Francisco and anywhere in between. When you're placing your tokens on there, it's really cool because you place there, but there's bonuses that you can get in between each. So if you place in, say, Santa Fe,
Right.
you'll get a bonus if you also place in Colorado Springs
Right.
or Albuquerque.
Right, so each of those two locations are tied to each other, and you only get the bonus if you're in each of those locations.
And it's important to note, too, that there's negatives there, too, on the lower end of the route. So basically, the game encourages you to get a wider collection of cattle. It all kind of works together because you're going to want to collect more cattle down at the bottom here to get 3s, 4s, and 5s instead of the 1s and 2s you start with.
Yeah, so the 3s, the 4s, and the 5s are what you'll be able to collect of numerous different colors. And you're only going to start with 1s and 2s, and I believe you start with 4 different colors within those. I think there's 8 or 9 different colors of cattle that you can have in the game. But whenever you go, you're only going to have a hand of 4 different cattle unless you unlock ability that allows you to take 5 cattle into Kansas City. So you're going to be limited with the number of cattle that you have every round. Another cool aspect in the game is that the buildings that you go to will allow you to do specific abilities, either buy cattle, move your train further along this route, depending upon how many engineers you have, to build buildings, even to collect money with certain types of buildings that you have placed upon the board.
Yeah, and I think one of the main things that you use these locations for, too, is cycling through your deck. Because at the beginning of the round, if you have a deck of cards that are all very similar, and you don't have that wide array of cards that you're going to need at the end, you're going to want to stop at locations so that you can dump some of those cards and refill. Once you get a nice hand of a wide range of different cattle, then it's a little more advantageous to make your way onto Kansas City because that's when you want to trade those things in.
So you're going to be balancing not only the cards that you trade in, but also your train being able to move, because once you go to the step 5 of Kansas City, you have to actually pay money depending upon how far your train is back compared to the location that you're trying to travel to. So that, in two, encourages you to be moving your train forward progressively each time that you move through the rondelle type of system.
Yeah, and thus far, I know this sounds like it's been an extraordinarily heavy game that we're describing here, but really, once you start playing, the heaviness is really in the learning process, I think, with this game.
Right.
And even though there's a lot of things in play and a lot of things that you have to balance, once you're playing, it is quite simple to play. What you're doing on your turn and the various things, it's very systematic and structured on the board, so it's easy to follow.
I also think this game is going to appeal to a lot of people because of one aspect. One is the player interaction. You don't like player interaction. I know you don't. You're not a big fan. I love player interaction, and this game has player interaction, but in a very subtle way. You are placing buildings onto the board, which slows the progress of other players and deters them from going through your own buildings, especially for ones that require them to pay money to you. Right. So you can set up a system upon the board which encourages players to not go to specific locations. They can always go wherever they wish to go, but they're going to be spending an amount of money either to that player or to hazards to be able to go through them, which I like because it doesn't directly say to you, I don't want to play this game because there's a lot of take that. There's not a lot of take that.
Forces tough choices.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, there are times, in fact, where we've played with a couple other people where you could go through the hazards and pay $3 or go this way and pay Jeremy $2. And I've seen people, even though they didn't want to spend 3 versus 2, they didn't want Jeremy to have the $2,
Yeah.
so they went the 3.
Right. The first time I played this also, I went the train route. And I thought to myself, this game is really, really lopsided. I was able to crush people at the table and said that's really the only way to play the game. However, the second time that I played the game, I went a cow route in which I collected a lot of different cattle. And my goal was, I don't know if you knew I was trying to do this, but I was trying to deny players the 3 spots. I was buying every 3 cattle that I could buy and putting it into my hand in order to force players to not have good cattle, which they went to Kansas City. So they were only able to, one of the players we had at the table was only going to the 0 through 4 spot because their hand was so poor, and I had negated them from getting all of the higher value cattle. So I thought to myself, what other strategies are there? There's numerous ones in here. You can build buildings, which I started to do later in the game, which discouraged players from going very specific routes because they'd have to pay me money in order to go those routes.
Well, not to mention some of those buildings later in the game, the heavier ones are pretty worthwhile victory point wise.
Yeah.
The cattle thing is interesting because if you this doesn't get refilled a whole lot during the game.
Twice.
There's really just twice that it naturally gets refilled. Other than that, you have to go to one of the cattle buying spots and then use one of your cowboys to refill it. So if you go there early and often, you can deny people a lot of access to the cattle. One thing I'd add to what you just said, I feel in this game like you can't go any just one route.
Yeah.
Like, you can't just go cattle and then deny the railroad completely.
Right. Yeah.
You do have to get your train up a little bit because otherwise you're going to be paying a lot of money to deliver your cattle. You have to keep a little balance on everything, but you can go heavier in 1 to maybe 1.5 of the categories for scoring your points.
This game also has a lot of variety and variables to it. The game encourages the first time that you play that you see these neutral boards in very specific locations. That's because it teaches you how to play the game and how certain aspects work together. However, you can always switch up these buildings, which I typically do now. I'll move the G building somewhere else because it just makes the game harder and makes players adapt to it. Now, not only that, but each of the 10 buildings that the players will have in their possession have a dual side to them as well. So players can play with the variety of having buildings that have 2 different types of way of being played.
Yeah, the interesting thing, too, about the building placement, I've played a few times now, and particularly the tile that allows you to buy the workers or the staff members, if it's placed late in the track or earlier in the track, that has a significant impact on the psychology that you go through in terms of buying workers.
Yeah.
Because if it's right here at the beginning, you're starting out generally with a fair amount of money from the cattle that you just sold.
Right.
So when you're forced to look at that and you think, oh, okay, I could spend my money to buy a worker.
Right.
On the flip side, if it's at the end, you're going to go through a lot of locations, maybe spend your money. By the time you get to the workers, you may have made a bad decision and forgotten, oh, I don't have enough money to buy a worker.
Right.
So it really does change the game. More than most games where you change things up, that placement in this game, I think, really changes it because of the rondelle mechanism.
And the length of this game, it may scare people away. It is going to last 2 hours, maybe even a little bit longer the first time you play. But it feels like it's the right amount of time. Most of these games, you start building this tableau of things in front of you, start enacting your abilities, and then the game is over. This game feels like it's got a natural progression in it where you are constantly laying buildings onto the board, building up your infrastructure with the staff that you have, placing your discs out on the table to open up new auxiliary abilities for you. It's really fascinating. I got to say, this is my favorite Alexander Pfister game. I love Moonbasa. I think Moonbasa's mechanisms in the game are brilliant. But this stands out as his best game by far.
I like it a lot because of all the different things that has going on, plus the theme woven into all of those aspects. It's a really, sort of that Americana aspect, too, in a very abstract way, I think will be very appealing to a lot of people because there's not a lot of good Euro-style games with an American theme.
I know, right?
So, yeah, I really like it, too. That length of time that Jeremy was saying, I think you could probably shave off some time off of that. It's not going to always take 2 hours. The first game is definitely going to take that. The other thing, like Jeremy said, too, it clips along at a nice pace. Even though it might take a long time, you don't feel like you're waiting forever to take your turn. The pace of this game is really good.
Yeah. Very, very good game, guys. Go check this one out. It's called Great Western Trail by Alexander Pfister and Stronghold Games. Have Happy holidays to everyone.
Exactly.
Make sure you guys subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook. And check us out next time, guys.
Bye-bye.
Season 1 of Man vs. Meeple is sponsored by TMG Games, publisher of great games like Yokohama, Guilds of London, and the soon-to-be-released Colosseum.